this with humility because I'm African. I share the same shame with my fellow brothers and sisters, our mothers and fathers who have been in leadership for so long. But maybe before I dig deeper into the relationship, I just want to demystify the myth that philanthropy came to Africa with foundations. Africa had philanthropy long before colonialism. And this is the reality. I am a Shona, and even in Abasoto and Abatswana, they regard or they recognize something that we call Ubuntu. If you go to Kenya, I know Lynne, so that you will not give me a little bit of time because you are the moderator. Even in Kenya, the Harambee, the Luo, the Kamba, and the Kikuyu people recognized Harambee, where communities could mobilize resources to collaborate with the ones that are in need, the impoverished or the bereaved in the community. Harambee was one. In Tanzania, in the Far East, Julius Nyerere has been one of the proponents of Ujamaa. And if you go to the communities like Chaga and Haya, you realize that Ujamaa was another form of philanthropy where people could actually bridge the gap of need to make sure that community survives. So these systems were based on one simple principle, which has not been recognized in the fraternity or in the spectrum of philanthropy, the system of Ubuntu, which is rooted on a phrase that I am because we are because I am. Comrades, nobody called that philanthropy, but it was simply the way that society could function. But I'll tell you where colonialism came and brought distortion, because it broke the balance. The colonial state extracted wealth. Missionaries and charitable organizations provided services. And Africans learned a dangerous lesson. What dangerous lesson, you might ask? The state started to take and charity could give. The state started to take and charity could give. This mindset of survival independency became a problem. Today, many Africans still associate schools, clinics, and relief not with governments, but with donors, with philanthropy. But one thing that I want you to be mindful of, during the run-up to the election, the state realizes its agents. They promise to build schools. They promise to provide food. But once they are in power, they forget this agency. They forget this obligation, this responsibility. And what they do is they abdicate that responsibility to philanthropy. This is one thing that colonialism's longest survival institution gave to Africa. And African governments take pride in taking and really disguise as serving the people. What is the big question today in the House? Because we've been asked, what's the relationship between the philanthropy and the state? If the government takes or collects taxes, but the foundations or philanthropy build schools, in that scenario, who should be held accountable? Is it the government? Is it the donor? I say because we pay taxes and the government is a steward, then we should hold the government to account. But what if I say also that it is philanthropy? Because it is philanthropy that makes our states to relax and abdicate and negate their agents to provide social service. Surely philanthropy should also be held accountable, because it gives the fish and we have forgotten to build rivers. Comrades, But what if also I say today that who should we hold accountable? And I say it is us, the young people. It is us, the taxpayers, us, the African youth, who for so long have been silent and tolerated the government taking and philanthropy giving. And we have normalized dependency. But let me just also throw numbers to the house. I understand my duty is to provoke, so I don't need to really have the burden of sequencing my talk. But just to throw little spanners so that people could start to really think through this conversation. Remember, with all humility, my ideas are not probably the best, but these are some of the things that I think we should be discussing as young people in Africa. So what I've learned when I was doing a little bit of research is that Africa have received tens of billions in charity as foreign assistance, developer assistance, or as philanthropic funding. We have seen a lot of foundations coming to Africa doing a good job. We have seen a lot of relief coming. We have seen a lot of support in the health sector, HIV and AIDS, TB, Ebola. We've seen programs, philanthropic programs supporting Africa. So should we say that philanthropy is bad? No. Because lives were saved. Millions survived because of philanthropy. What should be the question today is, why do so many systems in Africa remain fragile after receiving lots and lots of billions? I would say, because I've been identifying myself as a person who works in the sector of democracy, rights, and governance, I've ignored to collaborate with the comrades that are in philanthropy. The comrades in philanthropy have forgotten also to collaborate with us, comrades in the field of democracy, rights, and governance. That's why I took this call or this invitation with all seriousness. Why? Where philanthropy was given, it should also build systems to hold governments to account. To say this we are giving you as investment, but it's not going to last for long. And we're supposed to collaborate to make sure that where we were giving, we're not forgetting to build schools. Where the government was taking, I know governments in Africa, at the moment, if balls are drilled, they're the ones who are running to officiate. Disguising people, fooling people that they're the ones who have built those nice schools. And they were eating our taxpayer monies, buying lavish cars. And there was no synergy between these two sectors, philanthropy, democracy, rights, and governance. And that's where the problem is. And that's why I think today going forward, the conversation should also be, how do we amalgamate this bridge to make sure that young people in philanthropy work side by side with us, colleagues in the fraternity of democracy, rights, and governance, to make sure that we sell the good picture of what's happening. If the government is not building schools, let us not sanitize it because of philanthropy support. We should surely hold the government accountable. The paradox of philanthropy today is that philanthropy has the ability to solve immediate suffering, but governance solves recurring suffering. I'll repeat. Philanthropy solves immediate suffering, but governance solves recurring suffering. Philanthropy gives fish, and the other manages the river. But what I've learned over time in Africa is that Africa has become exceptionally good at attracting fish, but not building rivers. Our systems of governance are so much poisoned with corruption, leakages, to an extent that if you go to hospitals, because The philanthropy is saying we're only giving you ARVs for HIV, then paracetamol for basic pain killing is not available. But with good governance systems, you realize there will be quality prioritization of public funds use, and would know what to buy and what to build. But without also holding philanthropy to account, surely our government will thrive in looting and negating their agents. And even after 20 years, 30 years of aid, you realize that we will still be in need and will still be depending. Colleagues, I want us also to really reflect at this juncture. One of the most important lessons that we've learned after Donald Trump and his administration got into power, and also with the rise of far-right movements, the bilateral donor organizations also starting to cut funding. We've been exposed. We are naked because philanthropy has always been covering the immediate suffering, but has never built systems for us to survive. And this is where the challenge is. Health systems are still struggling. Civil society organizations are downsizing. Even as we're in this meeting, some are even contemplating if next month they will still have their contracts running because of normalized philanthropy, which is based on foundations, but not rooted exactly in our systems of Africa. What did this review? Not the donor failure, not the state failure, but our collective failure as a people to speak truth to power, to question systems, and to really co-design innovative systems that will actually nurture good governance, quality social service delivery, and pursuit of happiness for everyone in our society. As I'm starting to wrap up, I want to start to also talk about the conquerization of citizenship. Because in the absence of philanthropy, we have seen that very few people are now holding state accountable. Why? Because we've been relying on USA to do governance programs, to hold the government to account. And we have not been realizing our active citizenship role because we are citizens, because we are Africans, but because there was funding that was coming through from the philanthropy. And in this current state, the dilemma is, if we don't really provoke ourselves to think different, the bad governance systems across Africa are going to celebrate because we have been weakened, because philanthropy has been downsized, philanthropy has been withdrawn. And because of that, some of us who have been relying so much on donor funding to do our activities, we are at risk of losing our jobs and of stopping also doing the good job that we've been doing. Let's think today, what should we do next? Comrades and friends, let me just also conclude perhaps by also highlighting where philanthropy is also shown that it might not be the ultimate. African countries also could have solutions to solve their own problems. Rwanda, for instance. Rwanda has aggressively pursued state-led service delivery and reduced some form of aid dependency. And every day, every time when I watch football and I watch the recent noisy club Arsenal with one of the statements that features on their jerseys that visit Rwanda, I'm very proud of Rwanda. I don't know if people are really so giving me solidarity in mocking us now, or really give me solidarity because I'm celebrating Rwanda. I don't know which is which, but comrades, let's reflect on that. Botswana. Botswana is also a very good example of how they've leveraged their diamond revenue to build stronger public institutions that have survived over years and provided better service to their own people. Mauritius is also the same. They've actually maintained strong partnerships with the private sector, their own private sector. And through these triple P's, public-private partnerships, their institutions of social service delivery are better. So, which also then gives us the picture that there is hope in African philanthropy. And then the most exciting trend today is not foreign philanthropy, is African philanthropy, because aid has been withdrawn. So I want to throw this as my last remarks to comrades, is that African giving is growing. We've seen a lot of community foundations from Africa, mutual aid from Africa, and diaspora remittances alone are a good opportunity for African philanthropy. Wealth that has been created by African philanthropies, for African entrepreneurs like Dangote, Strive Masiwa. How can we really leverage this success and translate it into really philanthropy? This could actually be modeled from the existing infrastructure of what do you call it? The social services that private companies give to communities after realizing their profits. So I want to challenge young people today to stop looking east or west, but to start to look also around us and ask ourselves who will fund change in Africa, and also ask ourselves who will govern that change. Young people should demand accountability, not gratitude. Young people should build institutions, not projects. Young people should become taxpayers who ask important questions. Young people should enter public service. We should not shy away from running for public office to monitor budgets, protect the civic space, and reclaim Ubuntu as a governance principle, not merely as a charity principle. Because philanthropy is never permanent, but good governance should be. This marks the end of my provocation, wishing us a very good conversation. And again, thank you for this important invitation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Taka, for that. I feel quite provoked. I wish I was not a moderator right now. I wish I was on the other side of speakers, but thank you so much for that. I want to take this time to let the audience and everyone who's listening in to feel free. If you feel provoked enough, please you can drop comments on the comment section as well, and feel free to talk to us right here. I want to go into my discussions right now. We've been provoked. There's a question of collaboration. There's a question of, are we working together within people within philanthropy and people within democracy? Are we working together? There's a question of, what is the relationship between us and philanthropy? Is it complementary to the work the states should be doing? Is it replacing the work the states should be doing? There's quite a lot we need to unpack in that, from that provocation. And before I go anywhere, I'd love to invite the discussants, starting with Walter. To introduce themselves, what you do as a youth change maker. We need to know, what are we doing as young people in Africa? Karibu sana, that is why we say welcome from Kenya.
Thank you so much, Lynn, and thank you for all. First of all, I'd like to thank the leadership of this very wonderful platform for the invitation that was sent to us to come and speak to a very critical conversation on the African continent. As you've mentioned, my name is Walter. I am a researcher by profession. I'm a part-time politician, as well as also a global youth change maker with the International Organization on Migration, where we speak to issues of immigration and how we can protect young people from the various institutional gaps around global and even continental migration. Perhaps maybe you can, I don't know, did you just want me to introduce myself, or I delve deep into my
I'm coming
presentation.
back to you. I'm coming back to you in a few. I just want everyone to introduce themselves such that the room can be aware of who's in the room. And
Right.
then I am giving you my first question. I've heard a couple of interesting things from your introduction, and then
Okay.
I'll pose it to you. Tego, you can
Appreciate
take
it.
it away right now. Tego?
Oh, thank you, Lynne. Good afternoon to you and the audiences that have joined us. I'm Chorofa Jamalahodi. I'm part of Southern Africa Youth Forum. It is a civil organization which operates within SADC region. These are 16 countries, and we get to collaborate with public sector and private sector to ensure that the work ahead gets to be done. With that, just to put my comment about the provocator, I was just noting now and then. I even took some notes, and something that really sticked to me. It's how he said philanthropy, it should not be permanent, but good governance should be. And I look forward to this wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that as well. Good governance is there to stay. Philanthropy can be here one day, it cannot be there tomorrow. It's something we're experiencing right now in the world. Thank you so much for that, Tego. Christian, welcome. Please introduce yourself. Let us know who's in the room with us.
Yes, please. Thank you, Lynne, and also like to acknowledge the organizers of this event and express gratitude for the invitation, especially the African Youth Philanthropy Network and Ashoka. It's a pleasure being here and sharing the panel with Mr. Walter and Maleho Hodi. I hope I have well pronounced it here. So my name is Christian Elongué. I'm originally from Cameroon and I'm based in Ghana. And for the past 11 years, I've been working with nonprofits across West Africa at the level of capacity development and advocacy on domestic resource mobilization. We have the view that domestic resource mobilization is the way, and we are empowering local CSO to think differently, to start operating their nonprofit with a business mindset and not with a charity mindset, because resources are available, but you can only see it if you are willing, to see it. So we train on local giving, crowdfunding, domestic resource mobilization strategy, impact investing, blended finance, to several CSO across the region. It's a pleasure being here, and I look forward to share more on the topic of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to be circling back to you as well. And we have Dr. Valery in the room as well. A moment for you to introduce yourself, and we get right into it.
Hi, everyone. I hope I'm audible. Am I?
Yes, you are.
Yes,
Okay.
please. You are very well audible.
Thank you. I just heard someone from Cameroon right now, so I'm Cameroonian also. So I'm Bobuin Valery. I am also an IOM change maker like Walter, representing the Central African region. I currently work with the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, where I support African states and the African Union in developing effective post-conflict plans. And yeah, I'm very much keen to engage in this conversation because most of our working in the domain of post-conflict, it's dependent on European and American philanthropy. So yeah, looking forward to the conversations.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Valery. I'd love to now open this conversation directly to Mr. Walter Kasempa, who's here with us, and he has told us he is working on one side with IOM, and on the other side, he is a politician. Now, the question is, what is the relationship there? State and philanthropy. I think you starting us off from that point would be a good point. What is the relationship between philanthropy and the state in these current times? And is it serving the African communities?
Okay, thank you so much once again. I think, first of all, I'd just like to borrow the previous speaker who did a really good job in laying down the foundations of what philanthropy has been in Africa from eons. I think it's a really important thing for us to understand that philanthropy in Africa has never been an issue of charity. but it's always been culture, our way of life. And I think this principle in of itself has taken a shift throughout the ages, as well as also with colonialism coming in, and where we are now, it moved from being a cultural phenomena to a funding issue, funding of various projects, proposals, various programs in our nation states. So the relationship between the state and philanthropy is affected by various variables. Firstly, I would say the gaps that are found within the governance space. So some of these gaps can be the lack of resource to fulfill certain social services. Another aspect is the lack of capacity, both institutional infrastructure and perhaps even human capacity to fulfill various tasks for the vulnerable people and also just the general citizenry. Another gap that is within the governance space is the issue of debt. Because many African countries are servicing their debt, it means that the monies that they acquire goes to debt servicing, and social services are unable to pay. They're unable to deliver within the social strata. And because of this, you find that many states are now acquiring various official development assistance, or ODA. Now, currently, because of the geopolitical dynamics that are at play, we see that Africa in of itself has failed to grow from a continent that is dependent to one that is self-sustaining. So in short, we haven't been as self-sustaining as we could be, even in the context of us having the natural resources that we have. So because official development assistance from states beyond the continent has reduced, the subsequent cascading effect has that even if the US has done this, European governments are also doing the same thing. And also donor agencies are doing the same thing. So right now, there is now a need for a transition from not just official development assistance, but the need for philanthropic efforts in various aspects of the African society, part of which is transitioning from a funder of last resort to partnership in delivery. I think depending on foreign philanthropy initiatives has become underwhelming for Africa. And there is now a greater need for African philanthropy to now take center stage. So I think it's in a very tricky situation. Actually, recently with my day job, so I work as a researcher for a think tank that deals with global migration, where we advise governments on migration and immigration policy. And one of the tasks that I was recently given was to do a scan of philanthropy activities in Southeast Asia, Africa, Europe, as well as the Americas. And I realized that for Africa's context, philanthropy activities has diminished. And the majority of philanthropy activities that has been present within Africa has been from outside the continent. So that's where we are as a continent, and it leaves much to be desired. But there is hope, because a lot of African countries are now waking up to this reality, especially looking at it from a local resource mobilization perspective. I think I'll end there, and then I'll allow you to ask another question. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. You've talked about the gaps that already exist within the governance space. We're talking about lack of funds. We're talking about capacity. We're talking about debt. But then again, you ended by saying there's hope. I want to get into the hope. But before we do get into the hope, I'd go to Christian. Christian, this gap's existing, and you're talking about telling people, hey, there is a business perspective to this thing where people can actually make some money. Is this a conversation you're having with the communities that you're working with?
Yes, Yeah, yes, please. So indeed, as he has clearly indicated, there is a need of challenging how people see and understand philanthropy. Most of the time, because it has been a long phenomenon, there are many CSO, non-profit organizations, faith-based organizations who have been accustomed to be receiving help from outside. And as Walter clearly indicated, official development assistance has reduced drastically, not just the US, the UK aid, and many other European and Western the development financing institutions have shrunk, the portfolio of aid that was being given to Africa. There is therefore a need for local CSO to start exploring local ways of mobilizing resources. There are private institutions that are willing, through corporate social responsibility, to support, development intervention, not necessarily with always giving cash, but there are other ways that are also possible, such as, resources that are in kind, goods, network, connections, which can really be helpful in order to empower and enable the development agenda to advance. But on a general lens, I personally believe that when it has to do with the relationship between philanthropy and the state, we should always keep in mind that philanthropy comes to complement, right, what the government does. The primary responsibility of providing healthcare, education, and primary services, still entails to the government. But philanthropy is strategic in the sense that where there are gaps, where there are, needs or communities that have not been served appropriately, a philanthropic organization or actions can help complement those gaps and ensure that there is equity and that the government is able to effectively make impact, across the nation or the country. And Walter shared one striking element, which I didn't know before. I thought that the level of local giving was increasing, but he indicated that that philanthropy in Africa was actually diminishing. It will be good to know, is it across Africa or is it, in specific region, because there is a need to increase local giving and local philanthropy on the continent. Yeah, thank you.
Interesting. I don't know whether I should throw it back to Walter to answer that. Is it across Africa? Is it certain regions? What does that look like?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. I think the African dynamic is quite different when you look at it regionally. For example, when you look at perhaps maybe the situation that's happening in the Sahel region and the various structural issues that are happening there governance-wise, you see that the needs are fundamentally different. When you look at the East African situation, it's quite different. I know in Kenya and Tanzania, about 2 months ago, you guys experienced quite heavy flooding. I was monitoring that situation because of the humanitarian and migration implications on that. I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, Lynn, but I think Nairobi had some floods as well. There's some people who died
sure.
in Tanzania as well. So the philanthropic needs where government were lacking are different. Conversely, in Southern Africa, for the past 3 years, we had the El Nino effect that produced one of the worst droughts in modern history. So the needs there are fundamentally different. And I think that's where state to state collaboration is needed. So it varies in different regions depending on the needs and the capacities of the countries that are involved, because some countries have got different mechanisms on how to deal with the various needs. And I think that's where now the point of how you view philanthropy is, because regardless of the state of play in different regions, the underlying issue is the need to have the philanthropy as a cultural phenomena where governments do it. Actually, if you were to ask me, it can be something that can be even enshrined in law, as it were. I know in places like South Africa, there is some legal jurisprudence on the concept of Ubuntu, I know this because, in Zambia, we have a case currently on the burial of our late 6th Republican president that is happening in South Africa. And I was listening to the court case, and one of the lawyers was referring to some legal jurisprudence around the concept of Ubuntu and how it's applied in governance and legal contexts. And that, for me, is a case study on how it can be replicated, make the concept legal, and it should be able to interpret what philanthropy should look like, not just as an option of charity, but as a legal governance issue.
Thank you so much. And not as should be able to replicate that, not as the only thing that we're working with, or rather philanthropy as just charity. That's quite amazing. Christian, I hope you've gotten your answer from that. Different regions have different ways to handle things, and we can pick it up from there. Now, I'm going to go to Teho. What Christian has mentioned is, from what they're doing, there's a need, or rather a conversation around, hey, we need to think about this beyond charity. He also talked about the aspect of it being philanthropy being complementary. You picked up on something the provocator said. You picked up on good governance lasts longer. Philanthropy is here to stay, or rather to go. Do you think, in that case, then, philanthropy has been used deliberately to, replace what the state should be doing? Is it something you've witnessed? Is it something that when you're working, you've come across maybe?
Thank you for the question. So, in terms of philanthropy being used deliberately, I would argue to say partially it has been. So, looking at where we come from as Africans, in terms of Ubuntu now, it's being, philosophized as philanthropy, which is okay. Now, it has been part of us where we've been giving back. However, if we have been giving back so much, why is it that Africa is still looked as a developing country? So for me, it has been working, but not fully to its potential. Now, when I say not fully to its potential, we have to diagnose issues behind what is the setback for us not to reach to the common goal of, from my understanding, is to eventually get to the place of milk and honey, where opportunities just oils almost forever. Probably it is because of the corruption that is rooted, where there is mismanagement of funds, mishandling of funds, and so forth and so on. And another thing that is often overlooked is the political interference that causes the constraints for misplacement in philanthropy, whereby politicians do not want to be held accountable. And earlier on, our provocator did allude this, that during election, actually, that's when we get to see politicians being philanthropic. So now and then, they are literally, now it's like it's so quiet, we are looking for them, they are nowhere to be found. Come election times, that's when they get to be seen. And this is taking us backwards instead of marching forward.
Interesting. You say that we only get to see them when they come out during the election period, and you've picked it up from there nicely, and you've said not deliberately, but sometimes it has worked against us. What are the consequences? We've talked about it here and there, but what are the said consequences of that kind of relationship? When we think, okay, they're going to save us all the time, we're going to get philanthropy coming in all the time. What are the consequences looking for like African countries?
So the consequences of that is that it actually makes the citizens to be gullible. Now, there will be an element of these citizens giving their hope to politicians and politicians not showing up. And that's when we get to see high rate of crime. People will find innovative ways for good word, innovative ways of making means of income, means of living, which is not so good. So another thing that gets to produce consequences within citizens is that they can get to mistakenly expect much to be done through civil society movements, of which it should be the other way around, whereby the people that they have placed in power, they should hold them to account to get to be able to ask them, what has happened because you've campaigned about this service delivery? We don't get to see it. And another consequence is that it can also, and of which this is a bit of a touchy subject because of what's happening at the moment in South Africa, with illegal migrants, where people will just flood into a particular country hoping that they'll be able to see opportunities. At some point, a conversation should be held of why is it that Africa, we are so wealthy but not rich or nowhere to be found at the maybe LSM level 10 or 9? Why is it that we really need to have these uncomfortable conversations, because we are the backbones of the world's economy? Why that basket cannot work for us?
All right, why can that not work for us? Absolutely interesting. We are rich, but we are not on that scale. That's what you said?
Yes.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'd love to invite now Dr. Valery. Teka has talked about several things. She's talked about, one of the things that has stood out for me is literally the idea of the relationship between these two. If these are the consequences, then what should define the relationship between philanthropy and the state in the current given situation? How should we operate? Should we work together? Should we collaborate? Should we say, okay, you know what, let's find other ways? What other ways are we finding? Dr. Valery, maybe if you'd come in with that, would really be happy and appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much. I think since this conversation started, I've been trying to a little bit brainstorm and find out and to trace the path into how we found ourselves here. I think that's very important. If we are trying to look at alternate means of collaboration, looking at the nexus between philanthropy and the state, I think we need to ask ourselves as African countries, how did we get here in the first place? A month or so ago, I was reading a working paper from a World Bank series working paper from the year of the 1980s, the early 1980s, 1970s. During that period, most African states had just gotten their independence and were really upping their economies and were building up. I think, for example, a country like Cameroon. Cameroon was Cameroon had a higher development index than South Korea. Cameroon had a higher development index than most of the Asian countries, and that was the case of like the typical African country. But then, what that World Bank paper it identified the World Bank's position for Africa. It was clear. It said, this is me paraphrasing and trying to put it in like in a 30-second compact. The position was clear that African states do not need universities. Their point was education for African states should end at the level of primary and secondary, such that the Africans should be educated enough, just enough to be able to focus on the extractive industries and not the manufacturing industries. Like looking at it now in 2026, you see that that was the plan all along. So from that perspective, they said the very smart Africans will be transferred to Europe on scholarship. That was how we created that brain drain, such that as resources were developed in Africa, as they were being exploited in Africa, they were now taken abroad for processing and then sold back to us at exorbitant rates. If I thought they were even sold back to us. So from that dynamic, we saw how the African state was intentionally crippled. So the World Bank's plan was that any African country should focus on primary and secondary education, because they are, according to them, we were so poor. So higher education was so expensive. So they were not going to fund projects. They were not going to support African countries with loans and whatever. But every other country takes a loan. But the plan was for an African country, the criterion was, if you are taking a loan, the loan is not going to fund university education. Professors were too expensive to pay. That was the ideology. Research institutes were difficult to maintain. That is how we became literally poor in this modern century. Like maybe you could blame slavery. Yes, slavery played its part. But even at that, without the World Bank's position in the 1980s, we would have been somewhat developed better than what we are right now. So right now we have resources which we don't know how we don't even know how to exploit. We don't know how to make use of them. Where we try to want to make exploitations of those resources, they plunder us with war. So when we have those kinds of conflicts, that is now where we start hearing about philanthropy. We start hearing the white man has come and then they have given us some few $100 million to fight Ebola or whatever. But then we ask ourselves this question. If we were able to have developed ourselves during the 1980s, to have established proper research institutes across the country, across our various African countries, wouldn't we have been at a situation where, for instance, where there's a health emergency, would be able to respond to it on our own without needing help from the white man? So I was saying, before we come to that position of discussing alternate arrangements of between philanthropy, we need to understand first, where did we come from? How did we get here? So this is how we got here. So the first things first is, I'm being realist right now in terms of saying the situation is not going to change with this current generation of African political leaders, because these were the people who were around during the 1980s when the World Bank introduced that its paper and introduced the structural adjustment programs. These same politicians are the ones controlling us. So I feel the first issue should be the education of the mind. But who are we educating? We're educating this current generation who maybe in 10, 20 years, the Gen Zs, the millennials, those of us born in the late 90s, those of us born in the early 2000s. It's for us to re-educate our minds in terms of determining how do we want to engage with philanthropy. We look at, for instance, US aid. US aid was one of the biggest donors of, in quote, uh, foreign aid, philanthropy in Africa. But it was not for any purpose. It was not out of the benevolence of the heart of the United States. It was a tool of soft power, a tool of control. We look at when Trump came in, and I think the earlier speaker made mention of Trump. When Trump came in and he was putting pressure points on African countries, he removed HIV treatment from that. So where was the philanthropy indeed? We need to have a re-education of the mind in terms of this generation. I think the other generation is far gone. At this point, like, we need to start from scratch. How do we start from scratch? I think is in terms of re-educating the mind of this current generation, such that once we are in these seats of power, we can start talking about these alternative theories about philanthropy and the state. But as at now, philanthropy for me is a tool of state control, properly designed from the 1980s to put Africa in this type of position, whereby the West continues to have leverage over the state. I think, yeah, that's it for me.
Wow. That's very interesting. So our first point of conversation is to understand where it came from. Two, we need to re-educate our minds on how we engage with philanthropy across all Africans, from youth all the way. That's a quite interesting take. Then again, you've talked about in the 1980s, if we established ourselves, what would it look like now? Would we depend on them to come and save us? Would we depend on them? I don't think so. But then the question now, like you've said, we start by re-educating. Then can we have an ideal, or rather think about what would it look like if we actually started building those structures right now? I can see Christian saying, if philanthropy disappeared tomorrow, would our governments be ready to fully carry the responsibility? Would our governments and states be say, yes, we're going to take this and we're going to, continue with the work that we are doing? Christian, maybe you could come in. If we start from re-educating, then where do our governments stand with that responsibility? Are they willing to take it up? And then what do we form of that relationship? Do we chase them away and tell them, hey, we're good? Or do we restart their partnership after re-education?
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. I think philanthropy is a necessity, right? It's something that has come to stay. What is needed is probably putting in place an infrastructure and systems and policies that will enable philanthropy to play its role without overstepping its boundary, in a sense. Why that? Because the moment that the government start laying back and becoming, inter quotes, irresponsible or unaccountable for its primary duty of ensuring that education, health, and livelihood are increasingly improving, then there is a problem, because we have some African country where government institutions start depending more on philanthropic work to do their work. And that's where the problem is. Philanthropy, as I indicated earlier, is a partner, not a replacement. So the work that philanthropic organization or philanthropy does is to complement. So the government must always be held accountable for doing what they were put in place to do. Government institutions, whether they are schools, hospitals, and all of that, should continue be held accountable and responsible for leading the way. What we should look at government institution to do is, as I was sharing, the systems, for example, having incentive, to encourage businesses to give, making it easy for non-profit organization and philanthropic organization to easily be registered, to easily be operating, having the infrastructure for giving to be flowing easily. There are some countries where when you want to give, there are tax deductives that have been applied to it. There are countries where if what you are giving is going to charity work, there are some peculiar conditions that encourage that to happen, But I believe that in many African countries at the infrastructure level, especially with mobile money, Chango, I believe some of you are familiar with Chango, there has been a lot of improvement. So people who are now willing to give do not face that much barrier. Previously, if you had to raise, let's say $10, the cost of raising it from someone would have been a bit higher, sometimes 10%, But because of mobile money advancement, the banking system has been decentralized, so you don't need to necessarily have a Visa card or an electronic banking system to be able to channel resources to philanthropic organization. With mobile money, you can easily raise from $10, $5 here and there to enable your organization to have activities that will complement. So to come back to the question, should basically philanthropy disappear tomorrow? What would the government be ready to carry the responsibility? I will humbly say no. Many governments are not ready. And I honestly think no government actually in the entire world, even the US or China, no government can fully do or be effective without philanthropy, because no matter how willing, no matter how zealous you can be, there will always be rooms. There will always be things you may not perceive at the policy level or during the implementation. There are always going to be some groups of people who are going to be probably neglected or not, considered, from the design of intervention. And I think that's where philanthropy comes into place. So philanthropy will not disappear. If it disappears, government will not be able. So it's all about seeing how to create an enabling environment on how each one can fulfill its responsibility effectively for a mutually beneficial, goal. What I think the focus of the conversation when it has to do with philanthropy on the continent is more about with the current changes that are happening, what should be the future of development financing? How do we want philanthropy to be done on the continent? Recently in Congo, the African Development Bank was having one of its annual meetings, and one of the key focus of that was, that future, like the future of development financing. How do we want it to be? What are the systems? What are the structures? What are the practices that should be encouraged? And how do government, banks, and other institutions partner together to create that environment consistently across all the African countries, and the role that the African Free Trade Agreement plays into facilitating philanthropic work? Yeah, thank you.
That's amazing, right there, Christian. You've even alluded to some of the policy changes that you'd want to see be meaningful, or maybe what policy changes would be most meaningful to transform the philanthropic environment and see it work. But before we come to the policy changes, I would love to go back to Tejo and just question. Now, if we are talking about philanthropy from outside, I know the provocator had a conversation on African philanthropy. It existed way before, we started getting from outside. Where do we stand with African philanthropy, and where do we also draw a line with our very own philanthropy within the African context, that they also need to play its role without overstepping what the government should do? Where are we standing with our very own philanthropy?
Okay, so where are we standing with our very own philanthropy? As much as it's part of our DNA to give back, it shouldn't be a thing of civil society it has to be detrimental to a point where they overextend themselves, whereby they give away, there's nothing to give back. Because at the end of the day, these civil society movements, they rely on donors, and the government actually relies on taxpayers. So somewhere there should be a balance that needs to be struck in terms of how do we coexist in terms of complementing the work that needs to be given to the citizens for excellent service delivery. So what we can get to do is that there should be a way that government, civil society, and private sector shouldn't exist in silos. So sometimes what I get to observe is that everyone, it's more like, okay, just do the work. The private sector goes like, okay, civil society, here's the money that we can get to reclaim back when the tax come. You know what I mean? So there should be a way of private sector, government, civil organizations sit together in one room and find a way to achieve the agenda of the 2030. It shouldn't be a thing of the government has got this scope, private sector has got this scope, civil society has got this scope. They can have different scopes, but how do we complement each other? How do we get to meet each other halfway? And it's through conversations like this, they really need to sit down and find a way of not forever extending themselves. And I think it shouldn't be a thing of, it should be unimaginable that philanthropy should stop. It should be imaginable. As China was able to eradicate corruption through, if they found you as a politician, they literally take you to, in my language we say tapo, where it's more like a place where you yourself have to commit the act of suicide, because that's their punishable rule. It's more like, okay, you stole the pen, you need to punish yourself by analyzing yourself, quote unquote. So probably there should be harsher policies that needs to be put in Africa to say, look, we put our foot here. This it ends here now. We cannot be beggars anymore. What must we do to ensure that we strive for excellence for our people to deserve better and dignity? Thank you.
That's amazing. I believe that's the voice of the youth we're talking about, because we've been told we need to re-educate ourselves. Are we re-educating ourselves like that as the forum in general?
Mm-hmm. Hopefully we are. So with re-educating ourselves, it should be done at a deeper level. So in South Africa, unfortunately, our curriculum does not explore other African countries' history of what has happened. So we are here speaking about one Africa at times, but how do we speak about unity whereas you don't know where Zimbabwe comes from at a much broader detailed scale? You cannot fix something that you don't know of what has happened in the past. So re-educating ourselves means revisiting our curriculum vitae. Our curriculum, school curriculum, and get to say, how do we share amongst each other in Africa at an education level? How do we say, South Africa, here is a scope that you need to teach and educate your people at the primary school level, and it needs to be aligned with Kenya. You see, so now when you and I are in a room, or maybe we get to meet at the airport, we speak almost the same language with different solutions. But at the end of the day, it should be about the common goal of taking out an African person that lives in a continent that is wealthy, but not saving them.
That's absolutely amazing. I love that you've given it context that we need to speak as one. We need to know that we are being taught similar things, not even similar things, but we have an idea of what is going on, such that when we say we are speaking as one continent, we're speaking as one for sure. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to invite Dr. Valery on this. He talked about re-educating. We have an idea of how that should look like. Maybe what are some of the policy changes that would be meaningful to transform philanthropic work in Africa? What do you think we should be doing in that regard? Dr. Valery, are you in? All right. I can't seem to get him. Maybe he will join us in a few. But Christian, what do you think are some of the policy changes? You had mentioned 1 to 3 ways we can go about it, but do you think there are policy changes that would be meaningful to transform the philanthropic work in Africa?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay, okay.
It seems I lost you guys for a second. Sorry.
It's okay.
Am
You can
I
pick
am
it.
I back?
Yes, you're back, and maybe we can
I
close
think
it off with Christian.
okay. And just like I think with 1 minute from summation is we at this point in time we cannot know what is ahead of us in terms of what practice is going to like how the framework is going to look in like 10, 20, 30 years. I think what we can first strive for is some degree of self-sufficiency. I think once we are at such a level, only then can we now know what we want and what we cannot. Only then can we know our pressure points. I think we take a simple example like look at this Iran war, for instance. If I can draw should I say a parallel to it. I think before this war started, everyone, like I think from Donald Trump's side, thought it's an open and shut book, like open and closed case, similar to what happened in Venezuela. And now he's gone in, he has seen the difference, he has seen the realities, and now he's negotiating with Iran from a different perspective. He's affording Iran more respect than what he had envisioned in his mind, even before going into it. I think so. Even in January, when Donald Trump was getting into this war, if you had asked him what the outcome of the Iran war would be, he would have had a different idea. But then 3 months later, there's a different reality on the ground. So the first things first, I think, which us as African states should look forward to first is how do we get ourselves independent from philanthropy? I think when we get to that stage or to have some level of sufficiency, then we can negotiate on our own terms what we think philanthropy should be on the African continent. From then, that generation will look at its needs and its priorities and will be able to design frameworks which are appropriate to that context. So I think like that's my own ideology.
All right, thank you so much for that. Yeah, I think maybe I'll also go back to Christian and see what he has added. Thank you so much. You've raised your hand. I was going back to you. You've added something in line with Tego, shared it. Maybe you could pick it up on your own.
Yes, thank you. So I have a slightly contrarian view from what Dr. Valery shared about African government he said, being independent of philanthropy. Because in line with what I've been sharing previously, I believe the goal is not to be independent from philanthropy because it will never happen. No government can stand on its own without philanthropic work. It's impossible. Many studies have been done and have proven that the work done by philanthropy is essential, it is necessary, and no matter how strong institutional or public systems are, they are never enough or robust sufficiently to fully and satisfactorily cover the needs of the population. So the agenda for me or from my perspective is not to be independent from philanthropy, but to be independent from foreign philanthropy, like philanthropy that's coming mostly from out of Africa, because for now, I think that's what the issue is, that many governments in Africa are, interquote, beggars. They are depending heavily on what official development assistance ODA is providing. Recently, it has been indicated that at least 23.7% of official development assistance that was given to Africa has been reduced, right? For me, it is good. When USAID closed, I was one of the first to celebrate. I was saying, hallelujah, such should happen more often. Even though many were not sharing my view, I believe that unless people are forced to face change, they usually delay that change. You know, in personal change or organizational change, there usually needs to be a traumatic event or, you know, happening to cause people to start moving towards a direction, especially if they knew about it, but they were not willing. So USAID closure has been that push, you know, that destiny or God has engineered to force African government to start looking at the reality and say that, hey, public services should not depend on foreign aid. It is risky. It means that if a foreign policy is changed, it's going to affect public government in Africa or public services. It's unacceptable. So government must take charge. They must take their responsibility in their hand and see how to create a stronger enabling environment locally. I always say there is money in Africa. We have what it takes to take care of our need. From a biblical standpoint, in the book of Isaiah, the Bible says that if you are willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land, which means that in the sight of God, every land has something good. You must just know how to harvest it. But you cannot harvest what you don't expect. You cannot see what you don't imagine. So if we always think that our communities are poor, we have nothing, you help us. If you don't help us, you will die. If you don't support health services, our people will die. This thing will continue. But the moment we change our mindset, then we can start looking, okay, there is this high network individual. What can he bring on the table? This mama with her farm, what can she bring? The churches, the mosque, you know, a lot of religious institutions in Africa are having a strong financial power. But if the government does not create platforms or structures to leverage on what is already existing, we will not be able. Another channel, the diaspora remittance. I think one of the panel share how a lot of money is coming from outside of Africa. Senegal is championing that. Kenya, South Africa, they are like, do you realize that money that comes from remittance from outside Africa to Africa is even higher than official development assistance, which means that the money that the diaspora is bringing to Africa is bigger, but the infrastructure is not there to enable or make it easier to flow. You know, another way that policy should work is at the level of Africa, most of the giving that happens is, number two, informal and invisible, right? Informal in the sense that it's not like track, you know, like, for example, it's difficult to know how much African citizens are giving monthly, you know, but it does not mean they are not giving. People are giving, their friends have a problem here, they will support, they will see this NGO, they know their friend, they will give, but there are no ways of measuring it. In foreign countries, they measure it, they track it. So the government should make the existing policy to evolve so that we can capture, we can measure effectively the quality of giving that already happened, so that it's no longer informal, it's no longer invisible, it will be more formal and it will be more visible. If you can measure it effectively, then we will see that a lot is happening and we'll be able to further appreciate it better. So that was a complementary view to what my dear colleague, Dr. Valery, shared. Thank you so much.
Very interesting thoughts right there. Thank you so much, Christian. Love to hear them. A couple of things that you've mentioned is, one, we need to create structures to leverage from what we already have. And two, it is in terms of policy, most of the giving is informal and invisible. So we need to tighten our belts when it comes to that. Thank you so much for that. Maybe I'm going to loop in Taka in this. We have 15 minutes to time. I'm going to open up this conversation to the audience. If you have any question, any addition, please feel free to add. And Taka, you provoked us. We've been provoked and we've said a couple of things. Where do we stand? Do we go back to African philanthropy? Do we scrap off for foreign philanthropy? What do we do, Taka? Can you come back and then maybe tell us where we stand there?
Thanks very much, Lynn. I think at the moment, we don't need to holistically demonize philanthropy from whatever end that it's coming from. But I think what we need to start asking ourselves is, what are we going to do with the philanthropy that we are going to be having, institutionalizing all the funds that we are going to generate? What are we going to do with those? Are we going to really buy fish, or we are going to construct better dams to start to really produce our own fish that is sustainable? For me, I think the idea of philanthropy is to also start to invest in stronger systems. For example, what if we start to have philanthropy that injects money and we really have better industries, so that people would get jobs and families will start to fend for themselves, people will pay taxes, and the government, after collecting taxes, there are stronger systems to ensure that whatever tax that has been generated is also channeled to right use. For me, it's also about promoting also African philanthropy and making sure that African philanthropy thrive. One thing that we've also learned is that politicians in the context of Africa are more obsessed with power, to an extent that whoever comes in and start to say, I want to support who is local, they see that as a competitor of power. And when they start to see those people as competitors of power, they deter them or they demotivate people from really coming up front with resources. I've been talking to one of the business people in my community some other time, and they were saying that I wanted to really fix the road. The road has a lot of potholes, but when I wanted to do that, I had to go to the local municipality. The things that I was told to do for me to really just construct that road were a lot, to an extent that I felt like it was really a crime to help. So in doing so, I then told myself, no, let me stop doing this. So I feel like we need to start to have better policies, better architectures of philanthropy in Africa, better governance systems of philanthropy in Africa that also deter politicians from abusing power in a manner that, one, they really discourage local philanthropy and only start to celebrate foreign philanthropy because they know that foreign philanthropy might not really threaten their local power. Instead, it actually shows their weaknesses. So I think if we start to have that mindset, we are better off, but we are not in a position to demonize philanthropy at the moment because we need philanthropy.
All right. Very interesting right there, Taka. We cannot demonetize, or rather, what did you say? Demonize philanthropy because we really need it currently. That's a very interesting take right there. I see, Tembi, you have something you wanted to say, but there's always a question of governance and the C word. We are all shy to use. You could come in maybe and add a voice. We're opening up the conversation to the audience as well. If you're tuning in, if you're listening to this conversation, please feel free to leave a question, add a comment, whatever you feel has touched you from this conversation, please add it on the chat right here. Let's continue having this conversation. Tell me, maybe you could add your voice on this.
Thank you, Lynn. I really always try to be in the background of these conversations, but it was really to resonate, comment on what Christian was saying, that we need to treat African philanthropy as a national development asset. And currently, with how African governance is going, that's a tall order, that's a tall ask because of our governance systems. And the quiet C that we're not talking about is corruption. How is then philanthropy contributing to fighting corruption, contributing or enabling corruption? And how do we sort that? How do we fix that to enable philanthropy to thrive in Africa? And so unless we're able to answer all these questions when we are developing the next architecture as young people of philanthropy, we're still going to fall prey to the same system. And so for me, it's let's answer the critical questions as we curate this next architecture. Yeah, so it was just me entering the sentiments from Christian.
Thank you so much, which is very interesting. Some of these gaps were actually mentioned at the beginning. And maybe as we come to this conclusion, we talked about re-educating as one of the ways to go through it. But how then do we get to a point where, like we said, the big C and other gaps can be filled? As time is coming to a close, you see we have 9 minutes. I'd love to give each speaker a moment to rethink and maybe tell us, what do you think would work? How do we deal with it? Do you have a way maybe we can sit down and say, yeah, maybe we should go about philanthropy this way, given the gaps that exist with state and governments, in a way that we can have them structured well? What is your takeaway home? What would you give us to go home with? What should that look like? I would want to start with I've heard Christian for a while. I'm gonna go to Teko first, and I'm gonna go to Dr. Valery, and then we're gonna close it off with Christian. Teko, maybe what could you come in?
Sorry, Elaine. May you please repeat the question just there at the last end?
All right. I'm saying, what should we go home with from this? We've talked about the gaps that exist with governance and state, and we see where philanthropy is coming in. If we do not take care of corruption, we still fall prey of the same systems. If we do not take care of the capacity issue, we still fall prey. What should we be doing? What should we be thinking about as we go home and develop the next architecture? What should we think about?
Okay, thank you. Talking parts here, for people to actually get to think deeply of how can we evolve into implementation. We have to not necessarily find new ways, but under the sun, it has been proven that nothing is new. We just need to find ways to work with what we have. And what is the finishing line? Redefining it as young people, as governance, as people that are capable to influence power where possible. Another thing that we can get to actually introspect into is holding people accountable without, us as African, we have this thing of, we feel sorry when we want to ask the difficult questions, or we feel like, no, this is way too much, or, we hide our way. We gotta voice it out so that we can fix the continent and make it work for all of us. Another thing that we need to also really look deeply in is, it has been a troubling thing, that we have labor relation acts, employment equity act, that says if you are at this particular age in South Africa, particularly if you are 65, you have to be a pensioner. You need to be a retired person. Now, we have elders in Africa that do not want to give away power. They want to hold forever, of which is killing us as young people. So the eldership, ultra experienced people really need to also find ways on how to accept, to say, look, we really need to give it away so that our young people can run with it. We can probably become their sounding boards, mentors, find ways to coach them so that we can get to the glory. For me, it's always about the place of milk and honey, where opportunities must oil in Africa. This is what Christian said at some point. He said, we have money, but how is this money going to work for us if we are always beggars in these big tables? Thank you.
Amazing. How will this money work for us if we're always beggars in these big tables? Absolutely interesting. Thank you so much for that take. Dr. Valery, are you in? Maybe what should we take away home? Tak, I'm also coming back to you in democracy. How do we fill in the gaps? As you keep on thinking about it, I would love Dr. Valery to give a few last remarks as he answers that question. Is Dr. Valery around? All right. Okay. Maybe Christian, could you take it away as we wait?
Okay, so my closing thought, I think Dr. Valery touched about it, is at the level of mindset. There is nothing as hard as shifting mindset, you know, because everything starts from there. Trying to change the ecosystem without changing the mindset is vain. You know, trying to change policy and practices without changing, you know, like the source of our actions, which is our mind, is difficult. And that's where the education system is key, you know, because once you have been brought up in a system where you are always trained to think about mentality of begging, asking, you know, and not being held accountable, wherever you will be placed, whether it's in the public system, private sector, non-profit, that mindset will just reproduce itself. So I personally believe that for things to change, they need to be an intentional and deliberate, you know, willingness to accept that doing things differently, number one, is possible. And number two, believing that we can make it happen. You know, we can make it happen. I have a newsletter on LinkedIn, Shifting Mind, Shift Power, where I've been sharing some few reflection on that. There is also some conversation around this globally around Shift the Power movement, to which I've been participating, where we are trying to see how do we ensure that organizations in the global south, you know, are more, you know, autonomous, are more independent, because ultimately, when local philanthropy is enabled, right, it's not just about receiving money. Local philanthropy has this powerful benefit that it increases citizens' participation in the development agenda. And number two, it increases ownership. Participation in the sense that when you give to what you receive, right, you are more involved, which means that you will less criticize it at the end and the thing will be better. And ownership also in the sense that when citizens are able to give to what is being done for them, they will take better care of it. A simple example is, you know, if you are in a relationship, you will just know that the money that you have worked yourself before you get it, you will not use it anyhow. But any money or anything that is just a gift, you can just mismanage and all of that. So public infrastructure, public good, public services will be more maintained if citizens are given ways, you know, to participate in building the system. And this will require a shift of mindset. Thank you.
Amazing. That would require a shift of mindset. Thank you so much for that, Christian. Taka, you have 1 minute because we're closing out in the next 2 minutes to just say, where does democracy come in all this? You said we need to work together. What's the hope there? How do we look there as we close it?
Thanks very much. I think one thing that I would want us maybe to realize is that, not to criticize the previous speaker, I know the concept of shift power is one that is topical in the democracy space, to say we need to give back power to the people. But I would like to say that power is never left the people, but power has been mutilated in the people, because people still have their power, and what they need to realize is the agents with their power. Number one, they need to realize their power to really rethink the governance architecture of philanthropy. Number one, where as young people we know that we really have the power to really redesign, to normalize and to celebrate our architecture, because as we've collectively agreed that we have always have the values of philanthropy, Ubuntu, Ujamaa, these have been with us for long, but we have never celebrated them because we have been told that there is better terms, there are better Western terms, foundations to celebrate, and we never celebrate our own people. Number one. Number two, they need to realize power over. As young people, together with the elderly generation and the generation before coming after us, we need to realize God power over our natural resources, and we need to transform them in the democratic space to be useful resources to transform our lives, to fund our social service delivery. And we have the power to hold duty bearers to account, whoever that we're going to put as stewards for our resources. We need to make sure that we hold them accountable. And the power with, Africa should not start to think that they can survive as an island. No, we still need to collaborate with others. But in the process too, have power with others. We should start to celebrate our local power with our peers in the African context before going beyond the context. To say Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Madagascar, Mauritius, DRC, how do we have collective power to share our resources before
Okay.
going west?
All
I
right.
think that is very important in the democratic space to realize the power that we have and use it accordingly. Thank you.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you so much, Taka, for that. We've come to an end. I don't know whether there's anyone who feels left out as we've come to an end of this session. Our time is up. That was an interesting conversation, and I was so happy to moderate that conversation. Thank you so much for being here today. I don't know whether Tembi would want to close it off, but thank you so much. I have had a good time moderating. I hope you guys have collected nuggets as well. I have. The audience as well. Like, I've seen very few come through, but I hope we've all gotten what we needed to get from this conversation. Thank you so much. I have been your moderator, Lynne Obwoge, all the way from Kenya, co-founder of Rafiki Africa Media and Advocacy Platform, still championing for the same things you're talking about here. Thank you so much, Tembi.
Thank you so much, Lynn. That was an absolutely beautiful session. This was session 5 of 8. We are almost there in unpacking the next architecture of philanthropy. Thank you so much. You were wonderful. Thank you to our discussants. Thank you to our provocateur. You guys have given us so much to think on, and thank you to all the attendees and the participants. We look forward to seeing you for the remaining 3 episodes. We are almost there. We're almost there. It is building up, and we are building it together. So thank you, everyone. See you next week.